Welcome back, everyone. I'm Mr. Freaky, and this is 13 Miles. Episode 2, Armando's Eclectic Eatery. People generally avoid the 13 Miles like a plague. However, considering this fact, they do attract other sort of residents, who would like their lives and business dealings to remain under wraps. That was the case with Armando Gallo, an Italian-born immigrant who had made somewhat of a name for himself back in the 80s at his various restaurants. This was until he was accused of going too far with his cuisine experiences. When his money mostly dried up and upscale areas stopped allowing him to put his restaurants there, he set up an establishment in a little cabin-type restaurant out in the woods of the infamous 13 Miles, and he wasn't heard of again in the mainstream for a very long time. Our story begins with a young couple road tripping down State Road 23, straight through the heart of the 13 Miles. Having difficulty finding food options, they had driven for many hours straight without stopping to grab anything. The boyfriend was practically a fast food aficionado. He had tried every menu item at McDonald's and Burger King so many times he could list the exact prices by memory. However, he was looking for a new place on this day, something that he couldn't get back in Texas. He drove and smoked weed from a pipe while his petite girlfriend Hannah watched him nervously. Archer glared over at her angrily. "Why are you always so uptight? It's crazy." He took an excessively giant drag from the pipe and held it in for what seemed like forever. Then he began to hack and cough uncontrollably and had to pull the car over. Once on the side of the road, he got out and tried to catch his breath by walking around. "You gonna be okay?" Hannah asked him, slightly amused by the situation. Archer paced and ran his hand through his shoulder-length hair. "Yeah, I just wanted to get some fresh air. Get back in the car." "Sorry, you just looked sick." "Well, somebody ate the last of my pork rinds before we left. I'm smoking on an empty stomach over here." Hannah shook her head and looked out towards the completely empty highway beside them. Cars normally didn't take this route because of the infamous reputation of the 13 Miles. In fact, the two of them would certainly have known about it if they were from anywhere nearby. It was just too hard to navigate inside there. GPS would always malfunction, and even numerous people had claimed that directions were just jumbled within its borders. Right would feel like left would feel like right, making it nearly impossible to get out once you'd stumbled into it. That is assuming it would let you get out at all. At that moment, Archer noticed an old broken piece of a wooden sign laying in some bushes covered by moss. It was shaped like an arrow and said Eclectic Dining Experiences. Archer walked over and picked up the sign, then leered over at Hannah. "You think this was down that path up there?" She gazed at the sign with a glare, knowing what his next question would be. "Come on, I'm so hungry, and this would be something different like I was saying." He placed the sign up on top of the bushes, aiming down the dirt path. "Fine, as long as we can get back on the road within an hour," Hannah replied, annoyed. They got back into the car and started driving down the dirt road. Suddenly, a truck came around the corner at a high speed, headed straight for him. Archer scooted off the road as it flew past. Then, after about a mile, they saw a wooden building that looked almost like an old schoolhouse from the 1800s, and behind it was an old barn obstructed by trees and bushes. They pulled up to a small dirt lot in front, with 2 cars parked in it. "This place is still running?" "I just want to see what's in there at this point," Archer said, stepping out of the car. They couldn't find the front door at first, but then oddly it appeared to be around the side of the building. They walked around and entered in 2 old white double doors. Once inside, they were surprised by the decor, to say the least. It was all made from polished oak and black felt cloth. The walls were adorned with high-quality African artifacts and paintings as well. There were no tables anywhere, though, just an empty podium with a guest book on it, and a couple of chairs next to the door to wait in. Then behind the podium, oddly dominating the room, was a photo of 2 men in the Serengeti beside a dead crocodile with rifles in both their hands. One looked like a tour guide and had a name tag reading Kurt on his shirt. The other had greasy dark hair pulled up into a ponytail and a satisfied grin. They heard a cough as they looked over at a decrepit old African man in a 2-piece suit sitting beside them. The most prominent thing about him, though, was an enormous scar that extended from his forehead all the way down to his jaw. He was reading a newspaper, seemingly waiting for an appointment. They walked over and looked at the guest book, with a long list of appointments written on it, all with times and dates scheduled out into the distant future. Baffled, the 2 of them stared down at the book, not really knowing what to do. "Can't find your appointment?" the old man asked. We don't have one. We just pulled off the main road," Hannah responded. "Pulled off the main road? This ain't the kind of place people just go to, you know, he said, flabbergasted. Yeah, we can see that, Archer said, getting annoyed, starting to walk towards the door. Well, I suppose if y'all really did want to try it, you could take my spot in line. I ain't got nowhere to be, plus I do this all the time. The two stopped for a second and looked back at him. What kind of food is it? It's the dining experience of a lifetime, he said matter-of-factly. They looked at him suspiciously. Plus, if you don't like it, I'm buying. How about that? Archer looked at Hannah and shrugged, with her looking far less enthusiastic. Sounds like a deal, Archer said, walking back towards the podium. The old man walked over to a segmented portion of the floor, knocked 3 times, and looked up at the couple with an eager face. I'm Rodney, by the way, but the ladies know me as Handsome. He slid his hand over his enormous keloid scar. Archer rolled his eyes. The sound of a large steel bolt opening emanated from down below. The floor lifted like an attic door, and from below walked up the greasy-haired man from the photo on the wall. He had a dark green collared shirt on with jeans, and greeted the old man with a slight bow and a handshake. He then looked over at the couple suspiciously. Who are they? He asked menacingly. Just a couple food lovers wanting to partake in the experience. I told them they could take my place in line. But of course. He stared over at them for an awkwardly long time, then smiled. Well, chop chop. He clapped his hands, and without introducing himself, he walked back down the stairs. Rodney loyally ushered the two to follow behind. Still a bit suspicious, Archer and Hannah gazed at each other and headed towards the stairs. As they slowly walked down, they saw Armando standing up ahead with a little remote control. Once they got off the stairs, he pushed a button on top, and the basement door slowly shut behind him. Each and every experience must be completely private. Please, have a seat. And the man pulled up 2 chairs and placed them at the table in the center of the room. It was in front of a small wooden stage, with a red cloth curtain closed around it. Once they sat, he walked in front of them and stood facing away from them. Welcome. I am Armando Gallo, famed inventor, auteur, and chef. My dining experiences have been celebrated the world over and can be found in the great library of artistic cuisine. That being said, I know that greatness cannot be spoken, it must be seen, and that is what I intend to do for you here today. I present with you now our main course. He slid the curtain open, and behind it was a giant wild boar, chained up. Now, who is ready for our experience to begin? They both stood up in shock and started backing away from the table. Are you going to slaughter that thing in front of us? Archer said in a horrified tone. I am not. Armando then laid 2 knives out on the table. But hopefully, you two are. This is insane, let us out of here, Archer said, tossing the knife to the ground. Armando walked over to the chain connecting the board to the stage and put his hand on the latch. There is only one team who will escape, and that is the one who feasts upon their opponent's flesh. He held the remote back up for them to see. As soon as the meal is complete, I will release the door. Bon appetit! Armando unlatched the chain and opened a steel door behind him. He slammed it shut and locked himself inside. The wild boar took off toward them as Archer grabbed one of the knives off the table. It ran into him, violently throwing him against the wall. Hannah looked over at the boar and shuddered, with tears in her eyes. From up above, the old man heard violent thrashing and crashes from below. Then, after a few minutes, just silence. He smiled and looked back down at the newspaper. Then, several minutes later, the floor lifted back up again. Out came a bloody, disheveled Hannah, only she was alone. She stumbled past the old man, blood totally covering her mouth, and knife still in hand. She exited the building and slammed the front door behind her. Armando then came up from downstairs. The old man stood up, and him and Armando looked out the window as Hannah peeled out of the parking lot. You think she'll come back? The old man said to Armando. If the road lets them, they always do.